All right, thanks a lot, Jim. Really appreciate it. Again, I think we've got a great panel here today. So as they're getting situated, I'll do a quick introduction myself. JD Sherry, Vice President and General Manager of Cloud Security for Optiv. For those of you that do not know Optiv, we are the largest single cybersecurity pure play company in North America with global domination in our sights as far as we expanding out to extend the needs of our clients. So happy to be here with you today. We are an elite member of the Cloud Security Alliance. We are passionate about what they're doing, the commitment to increasing the visibility, the capabilities around cloud security, and enabling our journey to the cloud to be a successful and safe one. So that being said, I want to get into a little bit of the dynamics of our panel today. I think you've got a tremendous amount of mind share up here from across the different consumptions models, whether it be software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service. The gentlemen that you see up here today have extensive backgrounds in all of those areas and have lived through those different challenges that clients are seeing and are also helping design solutions for them today. So a couple of things that I wanted to start off with that I think are interesting. One of the rallying cries that we have really set forth at Optiv stems from a statistic last year that Gartner put out. And it's actually pretty shocking, and I think it's the reason why we're all in this room today. But, I'm very passionate about incident response. It's something that I've unfortunately had to live through some pretty nasty incidents back in the day. With the move to cloud, Gartner is indicating that 95% of the breaches in the cloud will be the client's fault. I mean, let that sink in. One more time, 95% of the breaches by 2020 will be the client's fault. This is why you're all in the room today. This is why you have a relationship with the Cloud Security Alliance to figure out how to get in front of that, how to properly plan and mitigate for that. But that is a very telling statistic that what's happening is all the affordability that the cloud brings us as far as scale, cost efficiency, availability, all of that is causing us to certainly accelerate our adoption. I think it was something like $208 billion in public cloud services last year alone, according to Gartner, consumed. With that speed and agility, we have a tendency to go a little bit too fast, and there could be issues with that kind of a strategy. So we have to be thoughtful and pragmatic about that and leverage not only the people, process, and the technology side. So, I have one more comment that Tom Korn isn't in here from VMware, is he, by chance? Okay, good, I can talk about him. So VMware certainly is looking at their journey to the cloud with some strategic relationships that they're laying out. One of the things that he said that's more of a glass half full component to cloud security that I thought was very, very insightful was, and I'm twisting his words, but you'll get the crux of it. So instead of focusing on securing the cloud, now bear with me, it's all about leveraging, basically leveraging the cloud for security. So instead of focusing, it sounds weird, but instead of focusing on securing the cloud, leverage the cloud for security. It's a different way of looking at it, but I think of everything we heard with automation and Shannon's talk and DevSecOps, I think that's a pretty insightful piece to say, hey, it's a weapon to be able to automate some of the things from a security perspective versus saying we've got to secure the cloud. So that being said, let's get to the think tank here in the brain trust. So we've got a tremendous amount of folks on the panel today that are going to walk us through. Hopefully there'll be some time at the end for questions, although I've been seeing a trend where we're running out of time for questions, which is unfortunate. But unfortunate, we'll be around afterwards for chat. So I'd like to give the guys a chance to talk again from different industries. We've got Rich, we've got Ram, we've got Raj, we've got Akshay, and last but not least, we've got Rehan. So Rich, let's go ahead and introduce yourself. A quick background on you, your company, and then we'll get into some of these questions.
Sure. My name is Rich Campagna. I'm Vice President of Products and Marketing at a company called BitGlass. So we're a cloud access security broker, a term you guys have heard many times today and probably many, many times over the last couple of years. So we're in the data protection business for when organizations like yourselves move to cloud applications, whether they're SaaS apps like Office 365, Salesforce, and Box, infrastructure as a service platforms like AWS or custom apps running on those cloud environments as well.
Great. My name is Ram Krishnan. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Cloud Passage. No, my name is not Sammy. And what we do, we're not a CASB. What we actually do is to secure your workloads as you move them into the public cloud, provide security and compliance for them, whether they're in the cloud, in a private data center, or anywhere in between, anywhere in any scale. That's briefly what we do.
I'm Raj Somani. I'm a CTO for EMEA for Intel Security. I also work as special advisor to Europol. I co-founded the No More Ransom portal, which, as it turned out, was one of the most targeted cloud platforms, I think. and to be honest, I didn't even expect it to be. It was just a nice surprise to know that I'm #1 targeted, I guess. So I also co-authored the CSA Guide to Cloud Computing as well.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akshay Batra, and I'm a Vice President of Security Product Marketing at Oracle. And my charter really entails securing Oracle's cloud, the large at-scale cloud, and also a lot of our security products that span our data security, identity, as well as a lot of our security cloud services, such as we have a CASB solution, Identity Cloud Service, SIM, and many others. Before Oracle, I've spent the last decade at FireEye as well as McKinsey & Company. So a lot of experience working in incident response and talking to boards about relevant cybersecurity topics.
Hi, my name is Rehan Jalil. I'm the SVP and GM for cloud products at Symantec. I came into Symantec recently through double acquisition of Blue Coat and Elastica, where at Elastica I was the CEO. At Symantec, we're looking at all aspects of cloud security, not just application security or web. In fact, from cloud perspective, it could be SaaS applications where data is going. There needs a different kind of security there. Your infrastructure could be moving to cloud, so workload protection, we're looking at that. And of course, consumer applications, like we used to call it web, now call it consumer cloud. We were also looking at how that needs to be secure, so looking at more holistically all aspects of cloud.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. We were joking backstage with Akshay saying that he needed to change his name to something that started with an R so I could keep the consistency going with the R's on the panel. So. Rehan, let's go with you and stay with that flow. So for an enterprise, is cloud security deployed as an island of its own? This gets into the evolution versus revolution point. And Frederick, early on from the previous talks, talked about the R word, the revolution. Okay. So, or is it integrated with the enterprise-wide security stack? So what are the most valuable integrations of cloud security with traditional non-cloud security stacks, essentially?
Yeah, so cloud certainly brings in a new requirement, especially how do you insert security into it and perhaps how you do the remediation. But if you step back, if you're a large enterprise, you have already various aspects of security. Like, what are the various aspects? You may have identity already chosen. You may have data loss prevention already in there. You may have SIM already in there. You may have, in the perimeter, you have proxy sitting there. So when you go to the cloud, for instance, like SaaS applications, when data goes into those applications, you have two choices. You can either create a separate island of new classification of data and new detection, or you can say, look, I already have data loss prevention policies. Can you take these policies and just extend it to cloud? So that integration becomes extremely important. Similarly, if you have identity already figured it out, or two-factor authentication already figured it out, you want to take that and apply to how your users get identified and maybe getting two-factored. And similarly, on the cloud, big issues, of course, is visibility, which means all the event information that you may be wanting to generate in the cloud. There is a reason for perhaps to have new models to look at those incidents in the cloud, but also bringing it back to your SIM environments and all. So I think the key thing is, while you're looking at cloud, be very cognizant. If you create an island, and there's another island on-premise, and you have two different policies active, and two different teams perhaps active, it creates the cracks through which the security breaches actually happen. Try to create that consistency so similar teams of DLP are just monitoring DLP both places as an instance.
Oh, brilliant. Beautiful. Thanks for that. I think that is a good segue, Ram, to some of the things that we heard Shannon touch on earlier with regard to DevOps and the DevSecOps movement. Obviously with what you guys do there and your experience in that arena, I wanted to touch on a couple of things. So why do traditional security approaches, not necessarily work well in this, growing phenomenon called DevOps?
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, Shannon obviously spoke about it about an hour ago. Around the notion of DevSecOps. So I want to double click, as JD just said, into a particular question of why the existing tools don't work. And the simple way to think about it is if you kind of think about how computing has evolved, and she referred to this, the Mark Andreessen statement of software is eating the world. No matter what business you think you're in, your organization is in, You're all in the software business. Every company in every industry at this point is a software company using software as a way to be able to compete and differentiate from their competitors. And so people are trying to put applications out faster and faster, and you're moving from a traditional kind of waterfall environment to agile and DevOps. Now we, in the Silicon Valley area, tend to live in a cocoon where we think everyone's already doing DevOps, but I think we realize the broader world is not, and it's only moving at this point. And so you go from an organization, an enterprise that has maybe a 9-month cycle for, in a very fixed, clear environment, kind of a define, develop, test, build, deploy phases, and you have the opportunity and the ability to implement security at runtime. You go from that environment now to one where you're pushing software out faster and faster. Maybe it's every couple of months, maybe it's weeks, maybe it's days. There's companies that are doing it in hours at this point and faster. When you go into a model like that, where you're pushing your software out rapidly, essentially it breaks the fundamental mold of security being something you implement at runtime in a production environment. And so security is now seen in that environment, and you heard her talk about this, as a blocker, as the folks that are holding things up. There was a very interesting stat, another Gartner study actually, JD, that came out about a few months ago, where Gartner surveyed a number of IT professionals and asked them a question about whether they thought security was holding them up or slowing them down. And 81% of the IT operations professionals surveyed said, yes, security is actually slowing us down. Not too surprising that a lot of them thought that. What's interesting is they also asked the same question of security professionals. Do you think you're slowing your kind of organization down? 77% of security professionals said, we think we're securing the organization. We're slowing it down. Just think about that. So 3/4 of folks here in the audience who are in security believe that security is actually holding up this process of pushing software out. And the reasons are, as I said, it's because fundamentally you have to rethink how you're implementing security in an environment where you can no longer rely on having that opportunity of 9 months between deployments of software when you can actually get out there and implement your security at runtime. You now have to integrate and build it into the process. You have to integrate with whether it's existing build tools, whether it's leveraging or existing orchestration frameworks. If I have more time, I'll talk more about how we go about doing that. So.
Fantastic, Ram. Appreciate it. I think that brings me kind of one of the questions that I wanted to get out in front, and it's actually a perfect segue for it. So, quick show of hands. Let's get some participation going here. I know how much audience members love to participate in these things. So, just for my own edification, how many people attended either? Let's just start one at a time. Anybody attend Microsoft Ignite last year? Raise your hand. Whoa. Okay.
That's
interesting.
A
Anybody attend AWS reInvent last December-ish? Raise your hand, big and strong. Okay. This is very interesting because we are at the Cloud Security Summit, essentially. And we are at the pinnacle of our profession with RSA. And we are now seeing this emergence of skills, whether it's DevOps and things of that nature. And we don't have near as many people coming to RSA as folks that are going to the various cloud platforms to understand not only how to deploy and consume cloud services, but there are significant tracks there to learn about security. So my ask of you is, think about that, whether it's your team or your integrated teams. Start looking at those various industry trends when it comes to cloud security in those summits, and go out there and start to dive in on the security side of it. Because quite honestly, this mashup of skills that we're talking about here is huge. And Raj, I want to move to you real quick on that front. You know, if we take a look at the skill set shortage that we have out there, and the unicorns and the leprechauns riding the purple unicorns for cloud security that we see out there, you know, walk me through the technical skill challenges that organizations are seeing as far as endangered species with these types of, you know, migration to third-party services. How do we look at this gap problem that we have and retool the folks that we have today in order to fill some of these gaps we have with the consumption of these third-party services?
You know, I get things wrong quite a lot. I'm quite proud to admit it. I usually get things wrong. My wife reminds me all of the time. And, you know, one of the things that I kind of believed was people are moving to cloud because you can transfer cyber skill shortages to somebody else. Pretty fair assessment, wouldn't you agree? And this morning, the CSA published a study with us called Trusty Cloud in a, I can't remember the name of the report, actually, I'll send it out later. And most people actually said that, you know, they're not moving to the cloud because they have a cyber skill shortage to the migration to the cloud. So in other words, what they're saying is that the lack of inherent skills in end user organizations is one of the blockers towards cloud enablement, which kind of goes against our common thinking. We always thought that people would move to the cloud because there is a cyber skill shortage. And it kind of got me thinking that, well, actually, why would that be? And what we've realized is that, you know, if you look at the skills required to migrate to the cloud, there's a fundamental requirement around information governance. In other words, understanding your assets, trying to determine your risk appetite, trying to have the appropriate skills to monitor the SLAs that cloud providers have. And so I think there's a different type of skills required. You don't need the guy that's going to be the specialist in IPS or DLP, but you need somebody who understands the technology, but can actually equally monitor the cloud provider and ensure that it meets the SLAs. So there are a different type of set of skills. And I know Jim said this a couple of years back, which is, in the future, technical skills will all be, you know, in the cloud anyway, so why do you need it for end user organizations? And I think he did it for the press personally, but I mean, you know, there is an element of truth to that as well.
Awesome, Raj, appreciate it. Akshay, quick question, kind of along the similar lines. So my personal belief in one of the major platforms we talk about at Optiv, and I think there's a big reason why there's a little bit of a gap of folks that are here at the RSA Summit and maybe haven't gone to some of those cloud industry events, is really companies are still trying to pivot towards hybrid cloud. So from that, you know, if you believe that these types of I guess stratifications are going to be what we just have to deal with. A couple of things I want to ask. You know, many people believe that the back door to the cloud and why there's going to be 95% of the breaches as the clients fall is because of their on-premise network is the back door, right? I mean, that seems crazy. So walk us through what are some of your best practices and trends for really securing the fundamental hybrid cloud.
Absolutely, absolutely, JD. And one of the things is this is definitely a very relevant conversation today because many organizations are on their journey to the cloud. Gartner is saying that by 2020, over 70% of organizations will have a hybrid environment, meaning that they'll have some on-premise and some cloud, and that journey will take them time to get to a fully cloud environment, and some may never get to a full cloud environment. So some of the best practices I would share with the audience is kind of two categories. One is just categories around how to choose a partner to help you get to the cloud and protect your hybrid environment while you do that, having a holistic security posture. And the second are some best practices to help, you know, build more power around your SOC, your security operations, to deal with today's changing security landscape. So on the first part, I would say that a key aspect of that is working to find a cloud partner who's going to help you through the journey of moving to cloud while also protecting hybrid. And so some of the things that are out there, some resources are out there today to help you. There's third-party verifiable reports. Even CSA has published a report, a CAIQ, which is a questionnaire. You can ask your cloud vendors for their responses to that. And some things to look for there that I really recommend is to understand who can view your data. If you partner with a cloud vendor, who can view your data? You should only be able to view your data. What happens if there's a breach? How do you collaborate with your cloud vendor in those type of scenarios? On the security operations side, you know, one of the things that we're seeing is I'm seeing a couple of key trends driving some of these best practices. So one trend is we talked about, you know, cyber attackers are taking advantage of cloud in revolutionary ways and driving new types of sophisticated attacks. We talked about the shortages in the SOC and some of the constraints the SOC is facing. And one of the things that we are seeing very prevalent is this notion that the network is also becoming more porous. And when you tie all of these things together, the type of solutions that you need are really around tying together identity across your SOC and starting with identity, because as your network becomes porous, each one of us in this room become the perimeter for our organizations. So identity SOC and the solutions around your SOC, your common solutions tied together with identity, automation, remediation, threat intelligence all coming together are some of the best practices to deal with that.
Can I just ask a question, actually? So, if we are the perimeter for our organization, I mean, how many devices will there be in 2020? I think, a billion, 50 billion, I don't really know. But surely we will be less relevant. I mean, us as the identity will be less relevant in a machine-to-machine environment. So by 2020, isn't that advice kind of not necessarily true? It's
a really good point, actually. And so Gartner talked about this in terms of extending users to identities, because as identity of devices, of Internet of Things explodes, the key fundamental element that you need to do your incident investigation forensics, one of the first things, if you ask SOC analysts, I got an alert, how do I enrich this alert to figure out what user, what device was compromised? And so absolutely, to that point, the extension of identity more broadly, not just users, but identity of devices, is going to be at the central point of a SOC.
Fantastic. Raj did promise there'd be some disagreement and some back and forth on the panel, so he's living up to his end of the bargain, so I appreciate that. Rich, certainly last but not least, as we look at hybrid cloud strategy, we saw some really interesting things discussed with AWS with regard to compliance and regulation. When we talk about specific verticals, and we have everybody probably representing the major verticals out there today, what are some of the variances in how organizations are securing their data in the cloud depending on the vertical that they may be in, right? We saw a laundry list of different regulation frameworks that you could select, and that would deploy a different set of partner solutions. But how does that really fit in from a vertical to vertical segment?
Good question. I think to a large extent it kind of mirrors and parallels what folks have done internally over the years, right? I kind of think of this as a pyramid. There's a base level of functionality, whether it's SaaS applications like Office 365, which is a huge driver probably for everyone in the room, or infrastructure as a service like AWS. There's kind of a base set of capabilities that are basic blocking and tackling types of use cases that extend across pretty much every vertical out there. And a lot of folks are kind of still in infancy, even though it's been 3-4 years now, this cloud journey. They're still in kind of infancy as it comes to security and compliance types of policies. So this is evolving over time. But I think if you look kind of across the board, what are the things that pretty much everyone's doing? Identity, obviously, that's a hot topic. Some people, a lot of organizations want to take those same identity policies that they built up over time, migrate those to the cloud. That's kind of a no-brainer. Access control, right? One of the big things for a lot of organizations are just basic use cases, like what happens when I rolled a public cloud app and anybody can come in from any device, even an unmanaged device, or what happens when someone clicks the share button and shares some sensitive data outside of the organization. That's true whether you're in a regulated industry or just any organization in general that has even a modest amount of security awareness. So identity access control, user behavior analytics, identifying suspicious activities and behaviors. And then more recently, we've seen a lot more, obviously, speaking to the last session on ransomware, there's a lot more on malware detection and prevention, right? So that's kind of your base type use case. And then as you get up into more regulated and sensitive types of organizations, you start seeing a lot more DLP. And then finally, kind of at the tip of this pyramid that I have built in my head here, are things like cloud encryption, right? So a perfect example, take a healthcare organization where they have a highly mobile workforce, and they also have HIPAA and protection of patient data to deal with. For that organization, chances are they're going down the path of Office 365. They want all that base type of functionality. But they really need to be concerned about the fact that all these doctors and nurses and other clinical staff are connecting into something like Office 365, and they need access to patient data. And that's directly in opposition with HIPAA mandates that require them to protect that data. So I come in, I'm a doctor, I got access from BYOD, and I'm gonna access patient data from this device. And so what do I do about that? And obviously that's a big concern, and the type of controls they build around that. Contrast that with someone in financial services where chances are the move to the cloud has been a little bit more slow, but it's happening right now. And there you see big things like a lot of workloads, typically test and development workloads, but now more and more production workloads moving to AWS, and a fair amount of Office 365 factoring in there as well. And for them, the big thing is, even if it's just test and development stuff in AWS, they want to do everything the healthcare organization did, access control, DLP, user behavior analytics, but they want to layer on top of that cloud encryption with keys that they manage on their premises so they can extend access to the cloud, but in a way that's not ever kind of exposing their data to a public cloud-based application. So just like with premises, there's kind of a range of sophistication and I guess complexity to the policies that people are putting in place. And that's kind of how it's factored in so far. One thing for sure, though, I think is over the next couple of years, because a lot of the security teams in every industry as they move to the cloud can, to some extent, jettison the concerns they had over network and infrastructure and application security in the past, there's more and more interest and I think a growing education level on things like DLP and encryption. And I think that's really where those are the kinds of technologies where there's going to be a big centralization over the next few years, even in industries that have not used those things in the past.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Ashke, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I'd love to add. Definitely agree with what Rich is saying. One of the things that I think is also going to be prevalent, especially with data security, is there's three kinds of things that I'm seeing. One is that with data security, one of our philosophies is if you can have security that's always on, that's much better, right? And that's one of our goals. But in order to do that, you need to be able to push security down the stack. And if you can push security down the stack, you can have it be more performant and more pervasive. So for example, talk about data security. If I can pull data security down, into hardware or at the database, then all the applications or workloads that run on it inherit those kinds of security, that data security. The other things that I'm seeing are really around sensitive data and having special controls around data redaction and capabilities like that to protect the sensitive data. And the third is a lot of use case around test and dev, where a lot of organizations are moving. One of the first use cases they're moving to the cloud is with test and dev. But you want to make sure that you have secure data. You don't want to put production data in your test and dev environment, or make sure that it's secure and use encryption, redaction types of techniques to do that.
Yeah, without question. The big thing that we see a lot with our clients, we've got probably a little bit over 4,000 in our portfolio at various stages of adoption within cloud. I'm sure exactly along the same lines as many in the audience. To put a wrapper on what they're saying, there is a genuine thirst, to use that word from somebody earlier this morning, to say, hey, I really don't have a strategy around my adoption of cloud, right? And the CISOs, which most of you are probably in the room that sit on that side of the chair, I think have a responsibility, and this is where we see a lot of synergy with CISOs, is advising what is often your boss, the CIO, in many cases, where they're already out consuming cloud like nobody's business, right? The cloud horse has left the barn. It has no saddle. And the CISO has to come back in and help them put the saddle on all that. And that includes everything that you do well on premise, and then an order of magnitude more as you start to fan out to the cloud. So, I think around the different verticals, the regulations, what we heard in Julia's comment on GDPR this morning, cloud plays a major role in that. So, there's the question of, will they bring a new renaissance around digital rights management in the cloud? And Rehan, I'd love to get your thoughts. You've built a company based on DLP and protection and access of cloud-based services. I was in Europe, in Paris, when the Snowden thing, and General Alexander said the name that not to be spoken again, when Snowden hit, and talking about cloud security in Europe at that time was a little bit awkward, right, because of all the news that popped out. How, with GDPR and digital rights management, how is cloud going to be a weapon for companies to actually not be scared of managing data in various cloud environments, but actually use it as a weapon to do it more securely?
Yeah, I think so. This topic has existed for a long time, RMS and all, but the cloud actually proliferates the data in a very different way. When you hit a share button, that can make 20,000 files available to maybe a lot of people in just one click of a button. So it's not just one file at a time that you actually share this thing, which means the management of the data, even if it is not in your cloud environment, even if the file leaves outside the cloud environment, you need to have some kind of visibility. Oh, where is the file going? Who's accessing it? And from where is the person accessing that file? And if I want to revoke that access, could I do that? So I think it's going to be very intricate, integration opportunities here. I'll give you an example. Encrypting all data is dumb because it's highly inconvenient. It's like a sledgehammer you put on the data and you encrypt everything. This is just not the wise thing to do. So which data do you encrypt? You do DLP on it for classify it, and you say, look, this is the kind of data that I do not want to go outside, and if it goes outside, encrypt it. So intelligent encryption. But then question is who can see it? And their identity becomes an important role. The person who has access to it should be able to see the data. And you should be able to monitor where the data is actually going. And then if a breach happens, the biggest issue is that if the data is stolen, there's a copy out there, you can't control it. If it's not properly managed, somebody can put it in a paste bin, and now you know that data is with thousands of people. So the ability to revoke rights to the data, first of all, even finding out there are 20,000 copies flowing around outside, and then the ability to, with a click of a button, to actually revoke access to it, is going to be needed in the cloud. Because if your file is sitting in a cloud application, if it gets shared, you don't know where it went. That's why I think this is extremely important. I would really call it, this is the renaissance of the rights management and the visibility and revocation capabilities.
Perfect. Raj, thoughts on that? It's something revolutionary that we need to be thinking about. That the title of this is evolutionary or revolutionary. What's revolutionary about where we're going with this?
Well, so that's the revolution. I mean, you make a good point, but easier said than done. How many people here have got a smartphone? Right, we've all got one. Yep. How many of you have apps on that smartphone? Right, we've all got apps. How many of you can tell me of those apps which cloud it sends the data to? Can you tell me what they do with that data, how it transmits that data, what they do with that data afterwards? And we're security professionals, and this is on our own phone. And we're talking about doing this for an entire enterprise. That's the revolution that we need to have, right? We need to be able to try to figure out the data flows. We need to try to determine the importance of that data, and then we need to implement policies which will encrypt or not encrypt based upon that. And then, of course, the other thing which we haven't mentioned is, where do we store the keys? Because you're not going to store it in America, right? Because everybody's scared about this legislation. Or you're not going to store it in the UK because we're scared of this. These are the challenges that we face. And by the way, we talk about machine-to-machine interactions, and we need to be able to identify machines. You're going to have a PKI infrastructure of 50 million certs. Anybody ever tried to run a PKI for 50 million devices? This is the challenge for us now as an industry, which is how are we going to be able to try to understand what's happening with our data and our enterprise? Actually, no, scratch that. How am I going to understand what's happening with the data in my pocket? Then once I've done that, I can try to understand the data within my enterprise. By the way, building trust in a cloudy sky, that was the paper.
There it is, the recall.
But I just want to disagree. One, because I said I would in the back room. And two, I think that kind of the picture you just painted is too intractable for pretty much everyone in the room. I mean, there's true. Everything you just said is true, but to go after every app on every smartphone, 50 million devices, that's just, it's not actionable for most of the folks in this audience. What we can do, all of us, every single one in this room, is start with the building blocks of building a core around the applications that matter. Apps like Office 365 as an example, or other apps that are being rolled out by the organization, and kind of build a security strategy that makes sense over time and eventually gets to that point. Versus, my response to what you just said might be to just throw my hands up in the air and say,
no, I don't,
it's impossible, right?
No, so it's not absolute, right? But you have to remember that if there is a breach, and you release 20,000 records from users in, I don't know, users in France, for example, then if the data commissioner is going to come to you, they're going to ask you, did you do your due diligence? What did you do to verify that? And that's what you're going to need to demonstrate. But I think there was a case a few days back. Remember DIN DNS that were hit by the major DDoS attack? They lost 14,000 customers because they were impacted, and yet they did their due diligence. So whether you like it or not, the market and your customers will react. And if you do your due diligence or not, it seems it doesn't matter now. You've got to get it right. Perfect. And that's the difficult scenario that we live in. It's the reality, right? Let's not kid ourselves.
Hey, we're getting towards the twilight of our time here. I want to hit Ram real quick on where I started the conversation, because I'm still passionate about incident response. I think glossing over that in the cloud is a big mistake. Ram, you guys heavily focus on microsegmentation. When we talk about separating things out, that's a big part of it. As you start to see clients realize issues in the cloud, how are they going to be able to evolve and do true incident response in the cloud? I think everybody in here needs to understand, you go to you want to switch? You want to take that one on incident response? Ram?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm happy to take that one.
Okay.
Yeah. You feel free to add.
I will.
But yeah, absolutely. My perspective is that incident response is absolutely something that you have to have a hybrid approach to, because there's going to be attacks that are going to span your on-premise and cloud environments. And this is one of the areas where I think there's two really important aspects I would highlight. First and foremost is you need to have partnership with a cloud vendor, and that's where a lot of the things I talked about earlier, the independently verifiable reports, the questionnaires that show what happens when a breach occurs, how is your cloud vendor going to partner with you? So I think that's a really important aspect. The second part is that you have to have automation, right? The number of alerts and the number of incidents that's happening are exploding. Like, I mean, I talk to organizations that have millions of alerts a week. So how are you going to respond to millions of alerts? And so this is where bringing together the concepts around identity SOC that incorporates your SIM, user behavioral analytics, through automation, with CASB, with threat intelligence, so you can get that context and you can drive automation of your remediation and response. I think that is the key, the key area to focus on.
Yeah, if I kind of go back to an earlier stage in this process of kind of being more proactive and fundamentally, your question you posed originally was one about sort of evolution versus revolution. And the thing I wanted to say is I feel like there's a little bit of both. To some degree, when you move from your traditional environments to the cloud, a lot of the issues you have to address are the same. And so at that level, it's an evolution. But the way you address them is where I think the revolution lies. I think fundamentally, you need to be thinking about how you approach the problem you're trying to solve in the cloud differently. And it needs to be, it's different because you need to think about essentially how you fundamentally design something from the ground up that is purpose-built for automation, that you can in the cloud environments, everything is automated. You want to be able to leverage highly integratable kind of environments. You want to have something that's extremely portable. It should be able to work and live, and your application has to be able to really be migrating from a data center to let's say a private cloud, to a public cloud, to maybe a hybrid environment as we spoke about earlier. And ideally, you want to have a solution that, that kind of goes across all of those. You want to be able to integrate with your existing kind of tooling environment, whether that's, again, on-prem or in a cloud environment. You need to be able to, as I said, scale up and down. You need to have a lightweight setup that does not kind of invade into your applications in some way. So fundamentally, I think the approaches you take to being able to secure applications and workloads in the cloud are completely different, the approaches you have to take. And that's where I think the revolution lies.
Right.
I'll just add one more thing to it. So I think issue seems to exist on two extremes. Either there's a big blind spot. You don't know if a SaaS application is getting used, like what are users doing inside those applications. So if you don't have the data to understand what the users or the hacker that has taken over the user account is doing, you can't do incident response. You don't know what happened. On one extreme, there's a blind spot. On the other extreme, there's a lot of data. So still the incident response, it seems like starts from, let's look at the logs, and then starts from there and try to do some kind of correlation, and then from there try to drive results. I think that's where there's an opportunity as an industry to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to build models around like which user is most threatening, which account is most threatening, which device is most threatening, and from there you can actually not only prevent hacks to happen, but also with the visibility of all the data that you collected, now you can go do more actions to it. And of course, orchestration plays an important role. Yes, you find out there's an issue going on. If you cannot go and change policies, remediate issues, remove files or remove settings, then it's the same issue. There's so much to do the humans possibly just cannot do.
Sure. Brilliant. Guys, great insight. I know a couple people look like they were on the edge of their seats wanting to ask a question. We probably have time for 1 to 2 questions with this distinguished. Right here, you got a microphone right next to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Carl Weaver. Two of you mentioned SIM. So I'm wondering if you're aware of embedded SIM and the GSMA's remote SIM provisioning program, which requires provisioning of the MNO's IMSI in the cloud and back down onto the device with the embedded SIM. Because quite honestly, that's very, very secure, and it's still involving the cloud. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think there may be 2 different SIMs. This SIM is more about incident management, and that may be the identity tied to the device.
I see.
Yeah.
So the
not, yeah.
Yep. So the next Next question is for the gentleman from Intel. You have a TXT technology in your chips. Why are you not talking about that? That's embedded device security.
I'd love to spend an hour up here talking about our products and services.
I get it.
What'd you say, Jim?
Thank you.
Let's cancel the afternoon and lock the doors, especially, and let's get the. I'd love to. I'd love to. And in
Let's
fact,
take that offline.
well, in fact, in the book, the CSA Guide to Cloud Computing, I actually did write the section about TXT specifically.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for your questions. We're at the end of our time. We want to keep everything going. Gentlemen, thanks a million. Audience, thank you. You guys were very attentive. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the conference.